Okay, good evening, everybody. We'll make a start as we're on 6:30. Just to begin with, this is a special executive meeting, an extraordinary meeting called with one substantive item on the agenda. As a consequence of the nature of the item, we've moved the meeting here to Walshingham Library in the interests of openness and transparency. That does mean that I have the pleasure of making the fire-related announcement. So just to say, not rocket science. If there is an alarm, there are none planned. So if there is an alarm, please do exit through the entrance that you entered from, and I'm sure we will all get out in a timely fashion if needed. Just by way of attendance's apologies, I've received apologies from Councillor Hines, Deputy Leader of the Council, Councillor Freeman and Councillor Wright. And Councillor Harding is currently on a tram slightly delayed at Navigation Road, but she should be here in the next few minutes. Item 2 is questions from members of the public. Just to advise at this point that we did receive, I believe, 5 questions from members of the public. However, it is a requirement that all of the questions are directly related to the items on the agenda and specifically the decisions that members are being asked to take. And so we've ended up in a position where only one of the questions received met that criteria. The other 4, in the interest of transparency, will be put on the council website for people to see, along with the reason why the questions have not been heard. But effectively, it is because there is a distinction between taking a decision to go out to consultation and the specifics of what any future work might look like if the decision that we take tonight leads to an amalgamation of the schools in future. So we do have one question from a Mr. Powell. I understand that he was going to struggle to make it this evening. Can I just double check whether Mr. Powell made it? No? Okay, so I will read out the question and then Councillor Carter, the lead member for education, will respond. Can I just double check before we do this? Everybody can hear me okay? Yeah, okay. So Mr. Powell's question, item 6.1 of the report states that further consultation with interested parties is recommended. The original consultation was not well publicised. I spotted a link on the Altrincham Today website. Please advise how the second round of consultation will be undertaken to ensure that all interested parties are made aware of the consultation period and that a fair representation of opinions are taken. Councillor Carter, lead member for education, please.
And the response is section 6.2 and 6.3 of the report set out the basic process, but to expand on that, this is expected that the council will look to use meetings with the public and with governing bodies, websites, display in local public buildings and drop-in sessions, along with responses to questions received from the public to ensure that as many members of the local community as possible are engaged in the consultation process. Details of the consultation process and opportunities to input into it will be published on the council's website. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Just, sorry, I should have said this at the beginning. The meeting tonight is being webcast, just so that everybody is aware, but provided that you're not sat around the square table at the front of the room, you should escape the camera, all being well. So just so that people are aware of that. Moving on then, having heard the one valid question that we received, can I ask if there are any declarations of interest from councillors present? Councillor Lamb, please.
I declare an interest as a member of the governing body of Stamford Park Junior School.
Thank you. Are there any further declarations of interest? No? Okay. So item 4 is the substantive paper, which seeks approval to consult on a proposal to discontinue Stamford Park Infant School and Stamford Park Junior School and to establish a new primary school on the existing school grounds. In the absence of Councillor Hines, who is the executive member, I will just say a little about the report before we move to consider the recommendations. So, as I said, the report proposes that we consult on a proposal to amalgamate the 2 schools into a single primary school through discontinuation of the existing schools. We do intend also to publish a related proposal to build a new 3-form entry primary school on the playing field and then demolish the existing infant and junior schools buildings to create a new playing field and public and school car park, rather. So just for a little background and context, the current Stamford Park schools were built in the early 1900s. The condition of the existing buildings is deteriorating. The buildings are currently undersized based on the government's Building Bulletin 103 guidance, and the existing school site is too tight for expansion as it stands. Infant classes are currently vertically grouped, which means that there are mixed age classes employed at the school. The need for mixed age classes would be removed by the expansion to 3 straight forms of entry, i.e. increasing the PAN, the pupil admission number, from 70 to 90. We did go out to informal consultation in June and July of 2019. The report before councillors this evening sets out the reports, findings from that consultation. I'll say a little of that, a little further on that in a moment. But we do propose to go out for further consultation on that 3-form entry primary school to serve both Stamford Park and the wider Altrincham community. The new 3-form entry primary school will be built on the existing playing field, as I said earlier. Once built, the existing buildings would be demolished to make way for a new playing field and car parking for the school. There isn't any car parking available at the schools at present, so parents, staff and visitors have to park on the adjacent streets. All the current land and space occupied by the 2 schools would be used to build the new school and provide car parking, playing field and play space. Just to say a little further, because I know a number of residents have contacted me about parking, that I think there is 1 parking space at present across the 2 schools. DFE guidance would require that for every teaching space, every classroom that we have, there are 2 parking spaces. So moving forward, any new building subject to further consultation that we were to go ahead with would have a minimum of at least 40 parking spaces. So for residents in the immediate vicinity concerned about that, I think it's fair to say that the parking would be enhanced based on where we are at present. So the 2 schools both have a pupil admission number, as I said, of 70 at the moment. If the proposal is approved, this would increase to 90. We are keen to expand the pupil admission number in the Altrincham area more widely, as there is a shortfall of places across primary age groups. That is not the overriding factor for selecting Stamford Park, because I think the condition of the existing buildings means that this is a win-win in my personal view. But the pressure on primary year groups across the area is, of course, significant. Year on year, Stamford Park Infant School is oversubscribed, and the demand from parents of places is, of course, very high. The other advantage in terms of looking at Stamford Park over alternatives within the catchment for expansion is that it is central within the Altrincham planning area, meaning that people from across the area would be within reasonable distance, including those living on the furthest edges of the wider Altrincham catchment area. So the limitations of the existing site and the condition of the pre-war buildings mean that it's not possible to extend the existing buildings to accommodate an additional 20 pupils per year group. The proposal to build a new 3-form entry primary school would provide fit-for-purpose modern accommodation. The current school building is 2,300, the current school buildings combined are 2,355 metres squared, and the minimum new school building would be 3,081 metres squared. This is in line with the Building Bulletin 103 guidance from the DFE and would give 766 square metres of additional accommodation. I think the issue around both the size of the building and also, importantly, the condition is something that I just want to dwell on briefly for a moment. So the condition of the Victorian buildings are satisfactory, though upkeep to the fabric and maintenance of the buildings is a drain on school funds. They no longer meet the recommended areas for today's teaching styles, and the Victorian layout, i.e. hall in the centre of school and with classrooms directly off the hall, and construction do not lend themselves to remodelling. The boilers in both schools have been replaced relatively recently, but the hot and cold water distribution pipe work and radiators in both schools are well past the life expectancy and due for replacement. The electrical distribution boards, power and lighting, wiring in both schools were rewired 18 years ago and are satisfactory for another 7 years. However, the luminaries, fire alarms, and emergency lighting systems in both schools are due for replacement in the next 2 to 3 years. And so our asset management plan shows the schools have a total of £1.2 million worth of priority work to take forward over the next few years, with approximately 753,000 of that at the junior school and almost £500,000 at the infant school. It's important also to consider the mould spores issues that have been apparent at the infant school. So high levels of spores were detected by a professor. Remedial action of introducing air purifiers and an increase in natural ventilation reduced the levels to ones of no concern, which was reported to parents. These levels will continue to be monitored, and so there's no suggestion that the buildings are currently unsafe in that regard. However, that is extremely concerning in my view, and investigation into the source of the spores is ongoing. In terms of the sizing issues against the requirements set out by the DfE, in terms of pupil numbers, the schools are undersized for their current intake, not just proposals to expand further. So Stamford Park Infant School is 36%, or nearly 500 square metres short of accommodation, and the junior school is 5%, or nearly 100 square metres short of teaching space. The juniors, as I understand it, are currently proposing to turn the bike shelter into extra teaching accommodation, but combined that is 600 square metres short of where they should be, and I do not think that when we have an alternative that is appropriate in this day and age. In terms of the suitability assessments for both schools, highlighting the number of school spaces compared to DfE guidance, net capacity calculations for both schools suggest an indicated admission number lower than the current PAN. As I say, less space than there should be. So the proposal to build a new 2 to 3 story, 3 form-entry school would not only allow for an increase to primary numbers in the Altrincham area, it would give a modern purpose-built building for existing pupils at Stamford Park, and it would mean that the school could phase out, and the infant school could phase out vertical grouping, which is never popular with parents, but obviously necessary when your pupil admission number is 70. So the proposal is that the infant and junior schools, close, and the pupils move into a new 3 form-entry primary school to be built on the existing site. I've mentioned the bit about car parking already, from 1 to at least 40 spaces, which I think is welcome. But in addition to the building condition, just a little more information on those pupil places. So the proposal is to ensure that the local authority meets its duty to provide sufficient places in the area. In the latest SCAP allocation 2020, the Department for Education reported that an additional 388 places were required in the Altrincham area. That's 55 places per year group, so approximately 2 forms of entry worth of additional pupils by 2020 in the Altrincham area. The role of Trafford's Place Planning Group is to investigate how these places can be provided in the most effective and cost-efficient way. Given the central location of Stamford Park, given the issues with the existing buildings and the current vertical classes, Stamford Park is therefore considered the best option for taking the shortage of space forward. So we are looking therefore to go out to consultation, which would be a minimum 6-week consultation. We would engage, of course, fully with the governing bodies at both schools, parents at both schools, and the community more widely. It will be important to recognise, obviously, that we have been through an initial period of consultation with residents, parents, and other stakeholders. In terms of verifiable responses, i.e. where people had given a name and address, there is considerable support for our proposals. Where people chose not to give their name and address, it's fair to say that there were some quite strange figures in terms of the percentages of people against. When further analysis was undertaken, it does appear as though an individual has sat and submitted a number of identical forms at certain times of the day. Far be it for me to appear cynical, but when identical forms are submitted at a rate of 4 per minute, we do think that we can discount the vast majority of those. So based on what we found in our informal consultation, based on the condition of the existing school buildings, based on the fact that we can end vertical classes, based on the fact that this will meet the statutory obligation that we have as an authority for meeting the needs in terms of school places in the Altrincham area, we are proposing this evening to move to consult on an amalgamation of the infants and junior schools at Stamford Park, and I move the recommendations as at page 1 of the report. I just wonder if Councillor Carter wanted to add anything as lead member for education.
Thank you, Andrew. I'd like to say thank you first to Karen Samples and Sarah Butters for all the hard work that they've put into producing this report and liaising with the schools in the run-up to this report coming out. One of the things that came out of the consultation was people worried about the heritage of the buildings and that they're important local landmarks. And I just want to reassure the community and parents that the heritage of these schools does not have to be lost. And we've rebuilt 3 schools from the same era recently: Navigation Primary, Worthington Primary, and the junior block at Springfield Primary. And these schools all wish to keep and incorporate some of the historical features, such as the stained glass windows, the date stones, iconic entrance arches. So we are saying that, you know, we are more than happy that we would keep those sort of features in the rebuild of a new school. And I also just want to touch on the governance arrangements, that once a proposal to establish a new community school has been published, the local authority will constitute a temporary governing body in anticipation of the proposals. The local authority must determine the size of the temporary governing body, which is to have a minimum of 7 temporary governors. And the temporary governing body is the governing body of the new school, and the governing bodies of the discontinued schools continue to be responsible for the individual schools until the new school opens. But after that, I think Andrew's covered all the main parts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Are there any questions or comments from members of the executive? Councillor Bohr, please.
Can I support what Councillor Carter and Andrew have said so eloquently? And I also want to thank our officers, who I know have put a lot of work into this. When these proposals first came forward, I actually thought that every family would be delighted to think they were going to get a brand new school for their children. So I was rather surprised when some of the negative reports came back. I passionately believe, as a governor for 30 odd years, and a grandparent and a parent, that our children deserve a really positive learning environment. The physical environment of school buildings and grounds are a key factor in promoting student achievement. And that is said in so many studies that you read today. And I was really concerned, because most of this has been covered, but I was really concerned to learn that SEN children and EAL children are being taught in corridors outside the toilets with no natural daylight. That cannot be right in this day and age. That's just one issue I wanted to bring up, but it's important. The fact that the school is not an environmentally friendly, either schools are environmentally friendly, is very concerning in this day and age. I'm not going to say any more, but I do feel that this is such a fantastic opportunity, and we do have to think about our children, not just the children at the schools now, but those that will be coming through the system. It is so important. And I'm sure most families, most parents would want the very best environment for their children. And these 2 schools are not the best environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bohr. And can I thank you also for the work that I know that you did on this when you were the executive member for Children's Services, and you know the interest that you've continued to take in this. It really is appreciated. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the executive? Questions or comments from councillors more broadly? I'll take Councillor Evans first, please.
This is with respect to starting the
Microphone, please, Councillor.
Thanks, on. Yeah, sorry. This is about starting a consultation. When is the consultation going to start? It's going to start tomorrow, because effectively we're going to lose 2 weeks because it's school holidays. There is such wide interest in this across the whole of Hale and Altrincham. It's really about giving the residents the best possible opportunity to feed into it. That's not positive or negative, just the opportunity. If it starts tomorrow, we're going to lose 2 weeks because people are on holiday, the schools aren't meeting. Then they get back in September, and that first week is a massive panic. Effectively, we are curtailing the consultation period. I just would like some comments on that, and really appeal for perhaps delay it or extend it a little bit more than the 6 weeks. Thank you.
Okay, well, not to sound condescending, Councillor Evans, but I don't know if you've read the report, because at 6.4 it does set out that consultation will commence in September. So hopefully that deals with your concerns in that regard. Councillor Coggins, please.
Thank you. I have several questions. I'll just do one or two and let someone else get in, if that's all right. I mean, probably like many other people, I've been contacted by a number of residents who are concerned about this and are really desperate to have their children in better facilities than we have now, and are very concerned about the element of 5.3, where the governing body of the junior school is rejecting it. And of course, many other residents contacting me saying we can't get school places nearby as well. So I suppose the biggest question is, well, what are the reasons that the governing body are giving? Are there some good reasons that we aren't hearing as to why they're rejecting it? I understand this is the academisation question. If we could just get some detail for all the people who are here or who are watching on the web as to exactly where we're at with that. And I suppose the other question is, how much force does that rejection have? Thanks.
So we'll take those ones initially. Clearly, the council have been in dialogue with the governing bodies of both schools for some time, and you're right, there is a question of academisation in the mix also. I think perhaps if I could ask Jed Rowney, our Interim Director of Children's Services, to just give a little detail on that, if possible. Jed, thanks.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, we have been in discussions with the junior school, and we had several positive meetings with juniors and infant governors combined. The junior school did consider all the background information, but they felt that they had been engaged with the discussions over academisation for some time, and that they didn't feel they had enough information in terms of the future plans at that time to make a decision to withdraw from one route and follow another. So they decided they would reject the suggestions. In terms of how much weight those carries, obviously, as councillors, you'll be taking into account any of the views expressed, and having what would be a major player involved and saying they're not happy with it. That's an opportunity in the next consultation, if it goes forward, for them to put forward their views again.
If I may just, I suppose the question is, what are the reasons that they're giving? So is it that they want academisation because it's financially beneficial, or is it for pedagogical reasons, or is there something else going on there? Thanks.
I'll let you come in on that, Jed, but just a reminder, Councillor Coggins, that we are not the governing body of the junior school, and so we need to be very careful not to be speaking for them. Jed.
My words exactly. The governing body made it very clear that they were interested in the proposal, they were interested in considering the proposal, but they did feel that they'd gone along a particular route in terms of consultation with the academy chain and the Academy Trust, and that they felt they had established a good link there and they wanted to continue down that route. It was a mixture of the things you point out about financial, about engagement with a broader range of educational support, and also the possibility of some broader support in terms of finance and in terms of special educational needs. But I think that on their website, there's a whole range of information they provide.
Okay. Thanks, Jed. Perhaps if we move on, come back if needed. Yeah, Councillor Myers, please.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Two questions, really. One is about the implications for staffing at the school. And I noticed from the report it actually mentions what will happen when it goes to three-form entry, and understand that. But as far as the individuals are concerned, will they actually be automatically taken on and in the new school, or will they be in these sort of TUPE arrangements?
I mean, again, I would ask Jed to come in on this, just for clarification. But the clearly we would want to work sensitively with anybody involved in this. Jed.
Yeah, normal practice is that you ring fence the staffing in the school, and we'll be expanding the staffing in terms of teaching staff in particular. But obviously that would be a decision for the governing body. But more pupils, more staff requirements. Yeah.
And the second question, Leader, was concerning the consultation process itself. There was clear irregularities in the last one, and I imagine someone's actually taken the time to look at the IP address of the person or persons who actually contributed to that. And I notice on section, I think it's 6.2, it says that you'll be asking for the names, address, and contact details of people that actually make a contribution this time. But will they actually be followed up in any way to make sure that those names and addresses aren't actually attached to other people other than the ones that make the contribution? In other words, they don't get their neighbours' addresses and names and details. So how will it be actually verified?
Yeah, I mean, clearly we don't want to be in the position that we were in with the initial consultation. So it's right that I think we put those safeguards in place. The particulars of what we can and can't do legally around making those checks is something that I think that we probably need to take away and just make sure that we are absolutely clear on what we can and can't do. I don't know, Jane, if there's anything that you want to add to that as the legal officer.
No, it's difficult, and obviously in each case we'd look at the particular circumstances to see whether there are any irregularities and patterns there. But we run a lot of consultations. We're aware of those which have more likelihood to generate this type of response, and we will look at that very, very carefully at the time to see what we can and cannot do to verify the information that's provided.
Councillor Mrs Young, please.
Susan, thank you for letting me speak. I've had quite a large number of parents in the area, probably because I'm one of the local councillors for the school. And I've had an awfully large number of people contact me, all of whom are in favour of a new building and amalgamation of the schools. And one of the points that hasn't been brought out, why they were so glad, I think, of the idea of a new school, is that one person who wrote said his child was in a class with 37 other children, which is an enormous number of children. Because classrooms aren't that large anyway. If you go look, another person who wrote to me said there were 34 children, and he thought that was too many children in one class, and it would be better if there was, a bit more space. So it's giving a bit of the background. But what I actually wanted to ask of you, because I did attend two consultation sessions that took place before, which I wasn't exactly overjoyed with. I felt it could have been done better. And I do feel that if a consultation is taking place, which it's going to, that it really ought to be well thought through and quite comprehensive. And I'd therefore like to ask, I don't know whether it's possible, would it be possible to consult with families, not just with the parents of people in the school, but with families of people living in the catchment area for the school? All families, because there may be people here today that might be looking to be prospective parents for the school, and they ought to be allowed to vote as well. I don't know whether you can manage to do it, but if you could anyway, that was what I wanted to ask.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, actually, that this is a very important proposal, whatever your views on it, for the entire community around Stamford Park and indeed the wider Altrincham catchment area. What I think is incredibly important to say tonight is that this is not a consultation for parents only. Clearly, residents in the immediate area will be impacted by this one way or another. Future parents, as you correctly identify, staff at the schools. So we will not be restricting in any way the people who can respond to the consultation. We just simply will be, on the point that Councillor Myers raised, looking to make sure that we don't have individuals sat in front of their computers submitting several hundred responses in their own right. So, but absolutely, in terms of the approach to the consultation, I think it's important that we do, reach out as best as possible. And Councillor Carter set out some of the ways that we will do that. Clearly, we want to ensure as significant a response from the local community, from all quarters of the local community as possible. And so the steps that Karina mentioned, which I guess we could email over to you just so that you've got those in writing, are really important. We do want to ensure that we get a good level of response to this. Are there any other questions? Councillor Lamb, please.
Thank you very much, Leader. I've already made my declaration of interest, of course, and no doubt the governing body of the junior school will make their full views known at the time of the consultation. But really, I think my sort of comment at this stage probably follows on a little bit from Councillor Mrs. Young, which is around the importance of this consultation, which I'm sure we all accept, and that it's not a binary issue in any way. It's actually a very complex issue, not least because there's an academisation sort of issue in there, which is difficult to untangle. But what we must not do is get into that sort of black and white sort of mode of thinking here. And I'm a little bit disappointed already this evening to hear a comment that, if you are opposed to amalgamation and the new school, then that's negative. Because there's a lot of positives, actually, which informed the way the junior governors were thinking about this. And certainly junior governors have at the very centre of their thinking, the well-being and the education of the children in our charge. So we must get away from thinking about this in that sort of binary way. And it also means that I think we need to, all of us involved in this, make sure that we immerse ourselves in the detail of it and really do understand what all the issues are here. And if we do, I think we may end up with a slightly more nuanced result than maybe is being proposed even in this paper, which again is fairly just black and white. And if I may, a criticism of the paper is that 1.4, and you, Leader, have mentioned it a few times now, about the condition of the building. And, I was immediately taken back to the, discussions we had about proposals to bring the huge demolition swinging ball into the town hall at Trafford at one point, and all of a sudden, there was a whole big argument put together as to why the town hall had to be demolished. And of course, as soon as it was not possible, then a lot of those arguments evaporated. And I sense a little bit of that in this in this section 1.4, because actually the junior school building is actually in a good condition, because capital has been spent over the years. And this is the point, people have to listen to the whole range of arguments here. And my point is that when I talk about a more nuanced approach, it is possible, of course, that not only the foundation stone might be saved from the school, but a lot more of it too. And I would hope that the consultation, if we have faith in it and trust it and trust its outcome, picks up on these sorts of issues and puts all the facts and all the arguments out there for proper and full consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. I'm just going to say at this point, because I can see hands are in the air, that this is not a public meeting. It is a meeting open to the public. So we're not able to take public questions, I'm afraid, unless they were submitted in advance and dealt with on the agenda at the beginning of the meeting. I'm happy to talk to you afterwards if you'd like. There's quite a lot in that Councillor Lamb, and appreciate that you have a position on the governing body at the junior school. I don't think anybody is seeking to be critical of the governing body of the junior school. Clearly, they have a different view to, well, ourselves, you know, as evidenced by the money that we set aside in the capital paper earlier this year, and also the infant school governing body. It's not necessarily about what is negative, but I do think that the proposal that we are putting forward here does contain some significant positives, and we could probably argue at length about the condition of the junior school if we wanted to do so. What is undeniable is that it does not comply with the DfE's guidance on size of classrooms, doesn't meet Building Bulletin 103 standards, and so that alone for me gives me significant cause for concern about the suitability of that building moving forward. You know, we are in a position where these schools are not large enough for their current intake, so we can forget any questions around increased TAPAN. Just looking at the conditions that current children at these schools find themselves in, it is not good enough. You know, Councillor Mrs. Young talked about class sizes of 37. I left primary school in 1996. I was in a class of 38 children. I thought those days were behind us, let alone the fact that those days are not behind us in a school that is not big enough. It is just not acceptable to be teaching children in corridors. It is just not acceptable. So I understand that this is a more nuanced argument. I understand that there have been conversations going on about academisation. I understand the points around the heritage of the school. I think what Councillor Carter was trying to say is that there is a history in Trafford of trying to encapsulate that heritage when work is undertaken. The examples she gave were just that, examples. That is not the end of that conversation in terms of what we could and could not do, in terms of maintaining some of the actually stunning original features in some of those schools. But what we have to deal with is the situation that our children are finding themselves in at the schools at present, and the issues with the wider catchment. But what we cannot, what it is really important, and I accept this, is that this is not the junior governing body versus the council. This is not the junior governing body versus the infant school. This is about how we all come together to try and improve those facilities. And there are different ways in which we may believe that that can be done. But I think it's really important that I say, for the record as leader of this council, that I don't think there's anybody involved with the junior school, anybody involved with the infant school, anybody involved in any proposed academisation, anybody within the council who does not want what is best for those children. And so I'm sorry if you feel that that was perhaps put forward as a view. It certainly was not what was meant. I think, you know, Councillor Ball was underlining some of the concerns that she had about opposition to a proposed new school, not about the academisation, not about any alternatives that may emerge. But our overarching desire is to ensure a fit for purpose school environment for the kids attending this school now and that will attend in the future. Can I just check, are there any further questions? I think Councillor Jerome, had you indicated? Yeah, could you come forward and use a mic, please, Dan? Thanks.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Board did mention the local environment, and I don't want to preempt the consultation, but as a Altrincham Ward councillor, lots of residents do tell us about the dangerous local roads, in particular Moss Lane, where there's lots of speeding traffic. It's on a dangerous curve, and we wondered if, as part of this, were any consideration on traffic calming measures in the local area to make it safer for children to cross the road, which would help BTH also, but also this new school and Stanford Park. So I was wondering whether there might be a school travel plan developed with feed-in from the consultation. The other point I wanted to make is that this council is developing some very good plans around school idling, parking on the way to school, but also considering road closures around schools. And I just wondered if this is being considered as part of this plan too.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Jerome. I'll perhaps bring Jed in a moment, but just to say, on the wider traffic issues. Where there are problems, we will of course look at them. In terms of our approach to engine idling, potential road closures, this school will be considered in the same way as all others. But one thing that I do think would make a material difference to road safety in the immediate area is the addition of a car park, because at present the school does not have a car park, consequently through no fault of their own, but because it is the only option available to them if they require a car to get to work. We have teachers parked in the immediate vicinity, so that will take less cars potentially off the highway. But clearly there will be work to do in the fullness of time around a transport plan for a school that's increasing potentially, if we go ahead with these proposals, from 70 to 90 in its pan. And I just wonder, Jed, if there are any statutory requirements around that, or what the usual approach would be.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, as part of the process, there's this informal stage, but then if we go forward after that and we get into statutory proposals, there would be travel plans engaged about transport routes, about safe access, cycle routes, etc., which would be all part of the planning applications as well. So that whole process would be gone through. I know when we had the briefing, we touched on some of the dangerous roads in the area. It's about how far that sort of discussion and geographically spreads, because we can't be talking about every road in Altrincham. It would be about the particular environment of the school.
And just a quick follow-up is also, it'd be great if we could get people out of cars altogether and develop an alternative.
Not sure that the proposals tonight are going to deliver that in and of themselves, but Councillor Carter, did you want to come in on that?
I just wanted to say, Dan, that if it gets to the stage that Jed's just outlined, a working party would be gathered from parents from both schools. And so it would be up to those parents to sort of input into that as well.
Any other questions or comments from councillors? Councillor Adshead, did you want to come in?
Just a quick, I wasn't intending to, but I think given the discussion, I think one of the things that does concern me is particularly about the mention of spores earlier. Now, I know it's not under control and it's obviously well within the regulations, but I mean, one of the things I found that as an asthma sufferer, it might be within the regulations, but people who suffer from asthma and those sort of chest things are actually more susceptible to it. So even though it's legally up to the levels, that they can actually, it can affect them more than they can, say, more normal, healthy children. So I think that's something that was a real concern to me, because it might be legal and so forth, but I think we're all very concerned about the impact that will have on children's health, and while their lungs are still growing and so forth, it can have more of an impact than, say, on probably adults.
So I'd absolutely agree with that, Councillor Adshead. You were right to say that they are meeting legal levels. We would not want to set the hairs racing unduly on this, but clearly there is a problem. It has required work before, given the age of the buildings and the fact that the source of the spores has yet to be identified. We can't categorically say that will not be a problem again in the future. However, I wouldn't want anybody to go away from the meeting tonight thinking that any child's health is at immediate risk as a result of that. It is a very important issue nonetheless. Councillor Welton, had you indicated that you wanted to speak?
Thank you very much. Dan covered some of the ground that I wanted to speak about, but I would say that as a parent with two children at one of our fine new schools, Navigation School, that has gone through a transformation like this some 10 years ago, that I think any child that goes to a modern, well-resourced new school is absolutely blessed. And we've been very lucky to have two children go through a school like that. And the one thing at Navigation was that the plans initially weren't optimistic, weren't bold enough. They ended up having to add 2 classrooms on later on, fitting more children into the same site. So I hope that I hope we're being bold enough with this scheme that we are going to provide the resources that all the pupil numbers in the local area require.
Yeah, I think obviously that's something that we've taken into consideration with the proposals around increase to PAN. I did share earlier some of the evidence base around that and how we're managing pupil places and the continued expansion or continued requirement for additional pupil places in the Altrincham area. So Broadheath Primary School, for instance, has recently increased its PAN by 30, but we are working in an environment where there is a requirement for an additional 55 places in each school year by 2020 in the Altrincham area. This would be a key part of that. Clearly, were we not to proceed as a result of the consultation responses, we do have alternative proposals. So, you know, we have, for instance, suggested that we could look at the Willows School in Timperley to increase their PAN by 15. But we believe, A, because of the placement of Stamford Park in the centre of the catchment, B, importantly, because of the condition of the buildings, and C, because it allows us to increase by 20 places, whilst maintaining the need for minimum space capacity within the school. This is the best option, not least because it gives children the modern environment that you correctly say that they require. Are there any further questions or comments from any of the councillors present? Okay, so oh, sorry, Councillor Coggins, go.
Thank you. Most of my questions have been covered. I had a few quick ones. On 5.6 in the statistics, there's quite a difference in the staff. It's not far off 50-50 in the staff. I don't know if it's possible to find out what the breakdown of where those staff are working. Is it that all the staff at one school are keen and all the staff at the other school aren't? I don't know if that's possible to find out, or if we could put that those sort of questions into the next round of consultation so that we can find that out. That was just a quick one. And just on the consultation, we know from other consultations that have been done that people with disabilities have not been consulted well enough or early enough, and can we make sure that relevant groups are being consulted very early? And then very finally, just picking up on some of what Councillor Jerome raised, although the agrees from the parents are massive, the disagrees from the local residents are massive. And when you look at the issues, it is parking comes up at number 2. I think it's 31% of them. And we have heard over and over again that this site has been chosen because it's in the centre of the catchment area. And just given what we know about air pollution, and we're so worried about the spores, we really need to see this as an opportunity to ensure that actually active transport is really supported and empowered for parents and children in the new school. This could surely be an opportunity. Would it be possible, for example, to apply to the Mayor's Challenge Fund for some funding to support anything like this? Okay, thanks.
Okay, so just in terms of the breakdown on staff responses, I don't know how that breaks down. It might be possible perhaps to consider, given the reasonable 50-50 split on that it may come out a certain way. But I think perhaps if Jed could see if we could pull that information together, happily share that with yourself and the other group leaders. The question around disability and the involvement of those with disabilities and those who struggle for whatever reason to participate in the consultation, again, we will make sure that that is picked up. That's something that we're looking at more widely in terms of how we go about consultation with residents. It's incredibly important. So absolutely, we will take that forward. The parking issue, you're quite right that I think it's 70% of local residents had registered disagreement, and that many had cited parking within that. I'm not convinced that we had made all residents aware as extensively as we should have done about the fact that this will enable a car park to be in place for staff, therefore alleviating pressure on surrounding roads. Active transport more widely, very important. I don't think anybody is suggesting otherwise. There is a need to recognise that not everybody can get to school without the use of the car. We've already mentioned those with disabilities, perhaps also those living on the very edge of the catchment. If this is a phased increase to PAN, it is possible that there will be people travelling from the very edge of the wider Altrincham catchment area. So it would be important to make sure that we were not overly prescriptive. That said, we have a very clear position of wanting to move towards not only tackling engine idling, but if possible, looking at potentially closing roads around schools. So we would want to make sure that this change, as with any change that we made to arrangements for any local schools, was mindful of what we were looking to do there. I don't know if you had any further questions. No. Any further questions or comments from councillors? Okay, the recommendation is at page 1 of the report. Just for clarity, I will read that out, which is that the executive is asked to agree to consult on the proposal to discontinue Stamford Park Infant School and Stamford Park Junior School and to establish a new primary school on the existing school grounds. All those in favour? Thank you. That concludes the substantive item of business. Item 5 on the agenda is urgent business. I am not aware of any, and therefore I will bring the meeting to a close. Thank you to you all for your attendance, particularly those residents, parents, perhaps members of staff who've taken the trouble to attend. We realise that this is a really important issue. It's something that we want to get right for current and future pupils of the school and also for the wider local community. So thank you very much for your interest, and I hope you'll all participate in the consultation in due course. Thank you.